anyways, moving on to our last segment, journal review. What's up?
We're seguing.
That's right. It's spelled SEGWAYING.
I thought it was seminal. We're seminaling.
Well, this could be a seminal to force a transition here. This could be a seminal piece of work in terms of the physics of, fly ball distance. But essentially, and I'll screen share here. This is a newest kind of piece by one of the leading physicists, if not the leading physicist in baseball research, Dr. Al Nathan, who we've referenced before on the podcast, who you got to hook it up with the screen sharing, by the way, Lindley.
My bad.
So yeah, if you're a big fan of, just overall advanced, okay, let's share the screen. Okay. You've probably heard and read some of Al Nathan stuff. Can you guys see my screen fine?
Yep.
And then Fangraphs loading is so bad. It's just been up here for 10 hours. Looks like it's still loading. We got all our stuff in here. Oh man, actually I need to sign in, dude, because I'm actually a Fangraphs member, and it might help this processing time.
Hey, that's a nice deal over there on Home Depot. Nice.
Let me see if I can do this. Let me see if I can do this live. Let's see what my password is. Oh man, they don't. Okay, I'll do this another time. I don't know what my password is. Anyways, so Nathan kind of recaps a bunch of previous work he's done here, and some of it is, like I said, I think the kind of first half of this article is almost a lit review.
You want to zoom in a bit? Try to fill up the text on the screen a bit more.
How's that look?
Also, for everyone listening to the audio, make sure to check the YouTube link in the description below. You'll be able to see the screen sharing of this.
And I'm gonna close this ad because it now takes up a third of my page. I'm gonna go through some of this stuff, but essentially, this kind of started in his past work with trying to see what determines the variation in fly ball distance when you do hold, say, exit velocity and launch angle constant. So that was the initial kind of aim he had. Like using hit effects data. What do you need? Or he has a spray angle as well. But initially, I think he worked on being able to tell like what exactly impacted fly balls and trying to remove all atmospheric conditions out of it, like wind and stuff like that. He examined stuff hit in Tropicana Field. And the initial article talked about backspin and the drag coefficient. And drag is, if you've read any of Nathan's work before, you're familiar with him talking about drag. But, drag can reduce the distance of fly ball travels. So that coefficient varies on a couple things, batted ball collision, the ball itself, things like that. But in this article, we don't worry about that. We work on assuming constants and control for certain variables. So that means like, okay, when you hold this around this value or the mean of this, what else impacts the fly ball distance? So a couple basic things. These are, again, past work of Al Nathan. As the backspin increased, the distance increased. So larger values of backspin led to more lift. Distance decreased as the drag increased, which is actually just what I kind of stated. I buried the lead a little bit there. And also, there's still a relationship between the drag coefficient and backspin. So the drag could increase with increasing spin, which is interesting. Kind of has all these like variables kind of floating next to each other and makes the relationship a little bit unclear. So there's a little bit of uncertainty. So kind of zooming a little bit here to give the audience like he recently this year wrote an article called "Why Does a Fly Ball Carry Better to Center Field?" And large conclusions taken away from that were, okay, fly ball distance also depends on side spin, not just backspin. And side spin itself is kind of determined from the spray angle.
Like spin direction a bit.
Yeah. So essentially, the distance is impacted by spray angle. The distance is maximized when there's no side spin, and it's symmetric. Right. So if you have negative side spin if you have the same magnitude of negative side spin and positive side spin, then that itself kind of the distance should be similar on both ends.
Right.
And the end side spin at 0 is just a little bit on the pull side, just a little bit on pull side of center field. So essentially, we can kind of like put all these together and then conclude that roughly balls hit at like a given spray angle just a little bit to the pull side, where side spin is closest to 0, will carry further than balls hit on that same spray angle on the opposite side.
Yeah.
So this now kind of has a couple things in the mix. It's unclear just how much variation of the fly ball distance is contributed to the spray angle, the backspin, the side spin, the drag coefficient, and just overall noise, because there's always going to be a little bit of noise. So Nathan kind of sits out here to tell which ones matter the most, how much do they matter, how well of a model can we build, include like looping all this together. So here he kind of like sets out some parameters he used. He used 2016 and 2019 StatCast data. He used, and this is kind of a little bit nitty gritty for people that are more familiar with like TrackMan and what it does, but TrackMan doesn't always track every single batted ball all the way. So he cut off and used only fly balls that were tracked at least 80% of their eventual distance to ensure a certain data accuracy and data cleaning. He looked at only data in Tropicana, again, to assume, stable atmospheric conditions. And he looked at exit velos between 94 and 110, launch angles between 25 and 30, and that gave us over 700 fly balls. Here he kind of goes a little bit over the relationship between total spin and backspin and side spin, and talks about, he kind of derived the linear dependence of the drag coefficient on spin, which he kind of showed here in he had a linear best fit, and the slope is very small because of the magnitudes we're talking about here, right? The RPMs of the spin are in the thousands. The drag coefficient is between 0 and 1. So the slope is 2.45 times 10 to the negative fifth, which means it's like 0.0000245.
Yeah. But
it's still a if you look, it's still a very clear, significant slope. So he derived out of this a kind of spin independent drag coefficient, which he refers to as CD0. And I'll try to similarly refer to. So that's one big thing, like getting stuff kind of isolating to only treat the spin independent drag coefficient by itself, rather than, since all these a lot of these variables kind of do relate to each other. He didn't want to attribute too much weight to the drag coefficient when in reality that weight should be attributed to the spin. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I was trying to break up the monotony of me monologuing on this to kind of hop in here, one word of assent from you guys. Okay. Yes. So the initial model, and I can kind of jump here because I think this is this kind of where the juice comes out, and a lot of this again is like more so like strong quantitative evidence rather than a lot of like discussion commentary. But when using just exit velocity, he was looking at the R squared value, so essentially how much it correlates directionally, and the RMS, root mean squared error, which is essentially a measure of error, like how much the model is off by on average. So the lower this is, the better it closely fits, and the two relationships kind of go together, although this is not always the case. In essence, you're measuring directionality and accuracy. So R squared is the directionality and RMS is the accuracy. So holding launch angle kind of in that range, controlling for exit velocity already gives us a pretty good relationship. And the models are here. So I'll just say first one, exit velocity. This is what the model kind of looks like. Second one, we used an adjusted spray angle, and essentially, since the spray angle really kind of depends on the backspin and side spin, this is another way of thinking about controlling for the means of the backspin and side spin. A potentially a little bit of a confusing concept, but Nathan goes in here a little bit. explaining just what that means. But essentially, the idea is the way he puts it: side spin is strongly dependent on spray angle, and backspin is weakly dependent on spray angle. So the second model already jumps a bunch, as you guys can tell. The data fits a lot more closely. The R squared goes from 0.56 to 0.81. Then mixing in backspin, we jump to 0.85 R squared. RMS is now 9.9. Fourth model, R squared is 0.89. Now baking in the side spin.
What is that? Is there a difference in modeling in this graph, this fourth one? Why are they like different colors? What is it?
He explains it here. He's splitting it out for things that had high drag coefficients. And yeah, this damn ad isn't away, so you can't like read this at the same time.
I thought you were about to add it to your card.
Yeah. Let me, yo, you guys think I can reseed this? But these are this is splitting up by balls that had larger and higher drag coefficients, higher and lower drag coefficients. Blue is the largest, white's the mid range, and red the smallest. So kind of the whole point of it is to show that when you are controlling for exit velocity, adjusted spray angle, backspin, and side spin of the batted balls, you can still see essentially different echelons based on their drag coefficient.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, baking in that last spin independent drag coefficient, we have a very tightly fit model of R squared 0.96. The RMS is 5.4, which we attributed to measurement noise. So in conclusion, these are kind of, this table should probably be better. Yeah, so this is kind of how the RMS keeps dropping as you include more and more variables. So this tells us just how good of a model you can build to predict fly ball variation. The ultimate measurement noise, so natural fly ball variation, is capped then at around 5.4. This is how each of the new variables impacts it. And using just each of the variables by themselves, Nathan wanted to see just how much each variable is responsible for it. So the adjusted spray angle has explains the most variation by itself.
That's crazy.
As you can see here.
This is how we should explain buckets.
Okay. Good point. Good point to note. So this can be thought of as, okay, just throwing that variable, tell me how much just that one impacts. Obviously, all of them together explain the most variation. The adjusted spray angle was the strongest by far, and then kind of the other ones all are fairly similar. The magnitude of backspin, side spin, the spin independent drag coefficient, and then just the natural noise. And I think here he has some graphs of the new metric he essentially defined, the spin independent drag coefficient, and just a positive kind of visual because it tells us the derived metric has its own normal distribution. It has, I think, a standard deviation of 0.018, mean of 0.3. So that tells it's an actual stable metric, despite being essentially defined by removing, the effect of spin. And his conclusion kind of wraps up what I've said. And this is kind of like currently the leading public source of information on, just what goes in a fly ball distance.
When was this published?
This was published pretty recently, I think this month. Yep. Looks like 6 days ago.
Well, I have a quick question about overfitting. So we talk about that a bit in the previous podcast. Is there a possibility that too many of these metrics are going to cause overfitting, or does he adjust, or is that taken out because he does things like does the drag coefficient and hopefully making it spin independent? Yeah, so that's the overfitting is overfitting and collinearity, which is a different concept where one of the explanatory variables kind of explains the other, so those aren't like causing the same root problem.
They sometimes go hand in hand. They don't always go hand in hand. But like collinearity will for sure overfit, or I shouldn't say for sure because there's always like different data environments and situations. But one of the things he tried doing was like having all these controls, like setting everything within that range to keep things as uniform as possible. Not have like some wild side spin value at like 40 or whatever that like led to some crazy fly ball, and then the model like overfits there because it has like one data point that's out there. That's so two big things he did to reduce overfitting is building metrics like the spin independent drag coefficient, and attempting to control everything within a specific data range. So again, controlling all the launch angle, exit velocity, adjusted spray angle as it keeps adding on stuff. It actually is. I mean, now that you mention it, I don't know if let me control F for this real quick. No, I guess I was gonna say it could be a nice added bonus to make clear whether these R squared values are just overall R squared values or adjusted R squared values. Because I think, like I've mentioned on the podcast, the more variables you add, the higher your R squared value will go. So that's why you usually want to do an adjusted R squared value, because that penalizes by the amount of variables you have. But these R squared values are quite robust, and these jumps are like even here near the end where they're not jumping as much. I mean, based on the magnitude, if you already have an R squared value of 0.89, which by the way, like means like your R value will be well above 9, right? Because if you have an R value of 0.9, that R squared value, if you can do that math, is 0.81. So 0.89 means like, you know, your R is just like in the mid 9s. You know what I mean? So to already have that much variation explained, and you add another variable and it jumps up like another 6% is pretty huge. I assume the adjusted R values, if these aren't adjusted, would be slightly lower. But like given all the controls and spin like independent metrics you kind of devise and the actual results, I'm not as worried about overfitting. But that's a really good point in general when it comes to like models where you use quite a number of parameters and are like, you know, attempting to deduce for the differences in variation as you go from model to model.
I have one more quick question. Did he mention, this is another thing we've mentioned on the podcast before, using a test and a training data set and testing data set. Does he talk about that at all? Like what data he uses to create the model and what he uses to test on it?
So he mentioned like the data set he used was all the Tropicana balls. He didn't, I don't know if he used a training data set. And the reason for that is essentially he's trying to build a physics-based model rather than like an ML model. Sometimes going hand in hand, sometimes they don't. But that is, if he didn't use a training data set, I mean, like, I think if he didn't use a training data set, the answer, or I'm assuming the reason he didn't use it is because this sample size isn't that big. I mean, it's
also
enough.
very, very like
specific.
Yeah. That's
it has to be between 94 and 110. Launch angles in a range of 25 and 30, and Tropicana, and between 2016 and 2019. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if he was to use a training and test data set, he like they would come out of this data set itself, and could be worth applying. But I think the idea was that he was deriving all these physical metrics for each ball, and then trying to explain that rather than predict the relationship. Because sometimes, like, and just another kind of segue back to the overfitting, because he didn't try to like apply some sort of machine learning algorithm, that's where like overfitting could be more at risk. You know, he's using like physics essentially, for lack of a better term, to assign weight or assign like all these values, right? Like backspin, side spin, adjusted spray angle. Those are all numbers that he measures directly rather than or infers rather than like gets from applying some sort of linear model and brings in those weights. Although he did do that for the spin independent drag coefficient, and then later showed the normal distribution and why like that's a salient metric to use. But like if this had been like some sort of prediction random forest, something like that, the overfitting would have been a bigger concern in my mind.
For sure, that makes sense.
Oh, and kind of relevant to, I just saw this, I think when I was skimming through, kind of relevant to our last point. I don't know, dude. I think Nathan might be TMR as well. What do you got on that?
Teaching me the wonders of R analysis software. Wow.
Shut his comment going.
Full
nah,
circle.
Bro. Get on Python.
Wait, go back up.
Just link.
Another shout out to R. What were we saying, Brady?
Go back up just a bit. What is that? What is that? Sunday Notes? Is that a new article? Kyle Bodie is bullish on Hunter Green.
Yeah.
Oh wow. All right. On the next episode of the R&D podcast, we'll get into Kyle Bodie being bullish on Hunter Green.
And one thing most people don't know, it's actually pronounced Kyle Brody.
Yeah. Kyle's
Brody.
Kyle's Brody.
Yeah.
Oh, we got a minute. We got a minute here for the smooth to smooth the Zoom ending anyways.
Want to end the drop screen share?
What's up?
Stop the screen share?
You don't want to read about Bodhi?
Yeah,
I'll say to wrap.
I prefer to do it on my own computer.
Well, hey, before we get ended by Zoom, Lindley, how's your calf doing?
I did jump ropes the other day, and it's a little hurting, but I think it might be good for this week.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's run when we get back. And your boy might hit another 3-hour tennis game with Mikey, dude. My fingers are going numb.
Win another pair of sunglasses,
dude. My fingers are going numb. We played best 3 out of 5 in the LA Heat, like I said. Game 5, I was up 2-0. My fingers started going numb. I couldn't feel my racket. I returned a serve with the side facing the net, and I was like, oh my god.